All right, so last little bit that we're going to cover with Washington today. Should not take too terribly long. Hopefully I can get through all this information. So Washington's going to serve his first term, 4 years, and then he's going to begin his second term, another 4 years in office, and he's going to be once again unanimously elected. In this second term, he's going to run into a lot of issues, though, same as the first one: new country, new problems. That's what what's going to happen. So in the first bit of his administration, war is going to break out between Great Britain, which, right there, Great Britain, what we used to be a part of, and France. So the French Revolution is going on. France is in this revolutionary fervor. They've killed their king. They've killed their queen. They keep killing all of their leaders. And there's all of this kind of craziness that's going on out in France. And so France gets kind of high and mighty and goes, all right, cool. Well, since we've got a republic and since we've got our democratic form of government, we're going to try and overthrow all these other kings all throughout Europe and try and create republics there too. So Britain doesn't take too well to that. France and Britain have always kind of been really, really hateful enemies. They've not really cared for each other too much, so they're going to be at war. So the question is, who do we support? What's going to happen? You know, the French came and helped us during the Revolution. They came and helped the United States during the Revolution. We were trying to fight to get our independence from Great Britain. And so France is trying to kind of be like, hey, you know, like you had your revolution and we came and helped you out. So where are you guys at? Like, you guys need to come and give us some assistance as well. Help us to fight Britain in the same way that we helped you to fight Britain. Jefferson is going to support giving France the assistance that they need. He wants the United States to help France. Reason for it being, it's just fair. Like, the French, like I said, showed up and helped us during the Revolution, so Jefferson believes we should repay that favor. Hamilton, on the other hand, says, well, Britain's a much more stable country, and honestly, it's a much more powerful country as well. And he says we need to support Britain in this fight instead and not support France, because Britain is our largest trade partner, and it would be detrimental to the U.S. economy for us to ally with France instead of Britain. So you got Jefferson on one side, wants to ally with the French. You got Hamilton on the other, who wants to ally with the British. And so it comes down to Washington to decide, okay, who am I going to help? And he decides neither. So he issues this thing called the Proclamation of Neutrality, essentially saying we will help neither. We are not going to help France fight Britain, and we're not going to help Britain fight France. We're just going to stay completely neutral. And what this does is it's Washington kind of putting forth this new precedent that in American foreign policy, when Europe starts to fight amongst themselves, all of these European countries kind of having their own problems, and they get into conflicts, and they look at America and they go, okay, who are you going to ally yourselves with? We're going to say nobody. Why? Because we don't have to ally ourselves with any of those European countries. We don't have to get involved in our conflicts. Reason for that being is we have thousands of miles of ocean between us and Europe. So Washington is going to issue the Proclamation of Neutrality. His belief is that America is way too young, it's way too vulnerable, and honestly, it's just way too weak to involve itself in any sort of European conflicts. And all American politicians are going to remain neutral in any sort of European affairs for a little over 100 years until we get pulled into European conflicts in 1898. But this precedent that is set by Washington is going to be followed for over a century. America is not going to get involved in European affairs. It's going to stay neutral. So that's one of the first issues that Washington has to deal with, the war between Britain and France and who to help. And he says, well, neither. We're going to stay neutral. So a domestic issue, an issue at home that Washington faces, is the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794. There's a rebellion that starts off, and once again, it's a group of farmers that get together because they're upset with taxes. Specifically, and you've probably guessed as much since it's called the Whiskey Rebellion, it's the whiskey tax that they are upset with. Farmers in Pennsylvania think that this whiskey tax that Hamilton has created is entirely unfair and that it specifically targets the poor. And so it's the western farmers off in Pennsylvania that are the ones that are going to get upset because they feel like it's a tax specifically on them. Just kind of as a reminder, this has a lot of similarities to Shays' Rebellion. You have a group of farmers that get upset because the government is doing something that they don't particularly like. So what ends up happening with Shays' Rebellion is it can't be stopped, and eventually the people realize, hey, our government is way too weak, we need a new government. So Washington is kind of faced with an issue. He sees this rebellion as a possible threat to the government as a whole. He goes, hey, if this gets out of hand just like Shays' Rebellion did, then this government is going to absolutely crumble. And I don't know if this nation is going to be able to stand another government that is not functioning and not able to work. So he has to come in and basically put his foot down and stop this rebellion immediately. He has to kind of show off the fact that, hey, the government this time is much more powerful than it was last time, and it can handle issues like this. You have Hamilton and Jefferson that kind of feel their own particular ways about it. Hamilton, of course, because it's his tax that they're rebelling against and upset about, he says, hey, government needs to show up, it needs to put its foot down. He says whenever the government appears in arms, it ought to appear like Hercules and inspire respect by the display of strength. Basically, all right, the government's going to get out there, we're going to stop this rebellion, kind of flex our muscles for a little bit and show off the fact that, hey, the government is powerful. Jefferson, on the other hand, feels the same way he did about Shays' Rebellion as he does about this one. A little rebellion now and then is a good thing. He likes this. He thinks it's a good idea. Why? Because the people rebelling kind of keeps the government and its rulers and politicians on its toes. Lets them know, hey, you get your power from the people. You don't just have this power kind of naturally. The people lend you that power. And when you don't work for them, then they're going to get upset. So Washington is going to respond very quickly and with an excessive amount of force. Keep in mind, these are just farmers. It's a few hundred farmers out in Pennsylvania that are just rebelling. So Washington actually mobilizes the army and shows up leading them himself into the battlefield with about 13,000 soldiers. There is no fighting that ends up happening. Nobody ends up dying. All Washington kind of does is he shows up with 13,000 soldiers and goes, what's up? Like, y'all want to keep rebelling? No? Okay, cool. Y'all go back home then. So the rebellion is going to end just with the president showing up with these soldiers. So what this does is it reveals the fact that unlike with the Articles of Confederation, which could not stop Shays' Rebellion, this time, under the U.S. Constitution, the government is powerful enough to protect its people, both from domestic threats, threats within the United States, and outside threats, threats from foreign countries. So, that's the Whiskey Rebellion. Last little bit about Washington. He is going to choose not to run for a third term. Washington's getting older. He's in his 60s at this point. He's not in very good health. And so as a result, he's not going to run for a third term because he's afraid that he will actually die in office. And the dude really wants to retire too. He's retired like 3 times in his life. And every single time the people have been like, please, Washington, come back, protect us. And every time he does. So this time, he's like, no, I'm done. I don't want to die in office because if I do, then people will think, hey, you can serve as president just until whenever, until you die if possible. And he doesn't want that standard to be set. So he is going to retire, not run for a third term. As a result, every single president for well over a century is going to only run for 2 terms. It sets that precedent that the president will only serve for 2 terms and then will retire to allow a new president to cycle in. When Washington leaves, he kind of leaves quietly out of New York because that's where the capital is at this point in time. So he kind of leaves under the cover of night, and the next morning is published in the paper his farewell address. And it's just kind of a few things, a few pieces of advice that he wants to impart upon the American people. Some things that he's observed within the nation, some things that he wants to warn the people about, and just kind of a few like thank yous as well. You know, I've really appreciated the time that I've had to serve the country. 2 of the biggest things that he warns against is the growth of factions and political parties. There's this thing called sectionalism within the United States. Key word in there being section. That Washington is starting to notice. He's starting to see a split within the United States between people, whether it be based upon regional lines like North and South, or political parties like we've got with Federalists and Democratic Republicans. So he warns people against that. He says, hey, you shouldn't form political parties. You shouldn't focus on your own region. You should all think of yourselves as Americans. And instead of focusing on what's best for your party or for your region of the country, instead think about what's best for the country as a whole. So he warns against political parties. He also warns against entangling alliances. That's kind of shown through his Proclamation of Neutrality. He says, stay out of European wars. Stay out of European affairs. America is isolated. It's far away from all of these problems. So he says, don't ally yourself with these foreign nations that can bring you into these wars and these conflicts that are entirely unnecessary. So with all that being said, we'll actually look at Washington's farewell address a little bit more in depth on the next day of class. So that's Washington. That's the end of his presidency. And the next president that we will cover is President number 2, John Adams.